Hello Steelers, and welcome to this special showcase of my recently finished Malayan Madness for Bag the Hun project. These are all 1/600 scale 3D printed aircraft. These were all designed by Jim Weir. They were all printed for me by Paul over at Sabotaged. He did lots of them for me. I wanted to do a Malaya project for a long time, and I was doing it in 1/300. Then I decided to go 1/600 when I realised that Jim had basically designed most of the airframes that were fighting over Malaya in 1941-42. So we've got a load of British RAF and also Royal Australian Air Force aircraft down the front here, and these are being hotly pursued, as you can see, by plenty of Japanese types. It pretty much covers every single aircraft that was fighting over Malaya. There's a couple of gaps here and there, but I'm really not that fussed, to be honest. This took a good couple of months, I would have said, to paint, I think. I've been sat and painting them just in lumps, really, about 12 or so aircraft at a time, and I just finished them off, so I thought I'd show them off. What I'll do is I'll get in close and I'll show you some of the aircraft individually. We'll talk about them and I'll show you the different types that there is as well, and I will then have a very well earned rest, I think. But I'm very pleased and very chuffed that I've actually managed to finish this and put rather than having these things just sat in boxes. It's just the best way to get them out and done as far as I'm concerned. Alright, well, let's take a closer look at some of these aircraft. Here's the Bristol Mark 1 Blenheims. These were being used as a light bomber across Malaya and also as night fighters as well with the Mark 1F. These were actually, one of these was being flown by squadron leader Arthur Scarf when he took off in his Blenheim. He was the only one surviving after Japanese aircraft attacked their airfield, and he basically flew on to Thailand with his crew to go and bomb some of the Japanese airfields that they were operating from. This is on the 8th of December 1941, so it was literally just after the Japanese had landed, and he attacked the Japanese aircraft, but unfortunately he was killed in the attack, and he was awarded a VC, and he was one of 22 RAF crew members that were awarded the VC in the entire Second World War. And then we have the Bristol Blenheims Mark 1Fs. So these are actually a night fighter version of the Blenheim, one of the early Marks in F. Basically this had a rack of 4 machine guns underneath the nose, just to give him a little bit more punch, really. These were used quite extensively across Malaya as well, especially 62 Squadron, for example. And then here we have the classic British fighter, the Hurricane, but this is the Hurricane Mark 1B, which is a tropical version of this, so it's got a larger air intake underneath the nose. These were operating over Malaya. However, there was very few of them actually in the country when the Japanese invaded, so a lot of them got sent over from the Mediterranean Theatre Operations, the MTO, which is why these ones are painted in desert colours rather than the standard RAF European greens and browns. These are in the yellows and browns, so that just makes them stand out a little bit, just makes them a little bit more interesting to have these fighting against some of those Japanese fighters. And here are the infamous Brewster Buffaloes. These were operated both by the RAF and by the Royal Australian Air Force over Malaya. They were actually an American design, so the Americans also use these as well. I do have a few more of these left, and I'm going to paint them in American colours at some point in the future. They get quite a bad press, the poor old Buffalo. It was a very good design in the 1930s, but obviously it was completely outclassed by the 1940s, especially by the new Japanese fighters. But it took such a long time to design, and that's the reason why it was pretty much outclassed by the time it got into the air, because it was part of a competition to find a new fighter aircraft in the middle of the 30s, and this is kind of what they ended up with, which, as I say, at the time it was a pretty good aeroplane. 5 years later, not so much, but it was still being pressed into service because needs must, really. These are the Vickers wildebeest. These were a 1930s torpedo bomber. There was a few of these, a couple of squadrons of these actually in Malaya on the actual landing date of the 8th of December. A couple of these actually took off and attacked some of the Japanese landing craft as well, up round Kotubaru. And they also continued to go attack the Japanese as they were advancing down the Malaya Peninsula as well, but they took very heavy losses. When the Japanese landed off Endau on the 26th of January 1942, 12 wildebeests of 100 Squadron attacked them. And they lost about 5, even though they were being supported by the Brewsters and also by the Hurricanes as well. And then there were finally another 6 were lost as well, along with 2 Albacores, which were another obsolete aircraft of the Fleet Air Arm. And they were withdrawn to Java in the 31st of January. I think they were being replaced, well, currently in the midst of being replaced by the Blenheims. So here we have the full gamut of the Zeros, the A6M2, the Mitsubishi A6M2. This is probably the most famous Japanese fighter of the war. I've done these in 2 different colours. I've got the early version in the lighter caramel colour, and then also the later version in the greener colour as well. My greens are slightly brighter than they normally would be because I'm doing them at 1/600, so I kind of want them to stand out a bit. But these actually weren't over Malaya. They didn't actually fight over Malaya. There were no Zeros involved in the campaign, but I figured you can't have Japanese aircraft and not have Zeros, can you? So that's why they've been included in this lot. This is the Ki51 Sonyas. So once again, I painted these in both green and the early colours as well for the attack on Malaya. This was also known as a Type 99 assault plane by the Imperial Japanese Army. It was actually too slow though. It was only introduced in 1939, but it was used in China. But it was too slow to fight against the Allied fighters, so they kind of turned it into a bit of a light bomber basically, and a dive bomber as well. I think some of these were used over Pearl Harbor as well. Quite a nice looking little plane, the Sonya. Here we have the Ki-50, Mitsubishi Ki-15 Babs. That was its nickname by the Allies. This was also the Army Type 97, as command reconnaissance aircraft as well. But it was also used as a light attack bomber. And it was used throughout the Pacific War as well. It actually started as a civilian mail plane, but then became a reconnaissance light bomber aircraft that the Japanese used over Malaya and elsewhere in the Pacific. Here we have the Ki27 Nitas. These were the main fighter for the Japanese Air Force into 1940. They were pretty much heavily outclassed by 1941, but they were still used all throughout the war. Actually, you've been used as kamikaze bombers towards the end of the war. These were actually pretty much outclassed by the Brewsters as well, fighting over Malaya. So they were already outclassed by what was an already outclassed aircraft in the first place. And here we have the Ki43 Oscars. These are actually my favourite aircraft of the Japanese Air Force. These are a new generation of fighters. They outclass the Buffaloes, probably on about a par really with the Hurricanes. But you can tell it's a new generation of aircraft that the Japanese were starting to use early in the war. These are the Ki48 Lilies. This was a light bomber introduced in 1940. It's quite a survivable aircraft actually. I mean, the first versions, the 1A and 1Bs, were pretty underpowered, but then they soon souped them up, and they stuck around actually until about 1945. They were usually escorted by a lot of fighters though, which is probably why they survived quite well. Here is the twin-tailed G4M2 Nell. These were an extensively used dual-engined bomber that was used over Malaya and throughout the Pacific War actually. These were involved, or aircraft of this type were involved in the attack on HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Repulse as well, both of which were sunk off the coast of Malaya. And it was the first time the capital ships were actively defending themselves and were sunk completely by air power alone. They were also known as the Flying Lighter, or the One-Shot Lighter as well, because they didn't have self-sealing fuel tanks, so they were quite susceptible to burning, unfortunately for them. So this is the Mitsubishi G4M2s. These are Bettys. These were the most famous of the Japanese bombers. in the Second World War, the most numerical as well, I think, and just the best well known. These were involved in the sinking of the HMS Repulse and the Prince of Wales off the coast of Malaya in 1941, and they served throughout the war. The early versions were very lightly armoured and also didn't have self-sealing tanks as well, which led to them burning quite often. Here we have the early version of the G4M, which is the G4M1. These are the Bettys again. These were the under-armoured version, which were the later versions had them up-armoured, which slowed them down slightly, but at least it meant protection for the crew. Also, these didn't have self-sealing tanks either, which meant, again, burning for the crew, and potentially these were called the one-shot lighters. But again, one of the famous bombers of the Japanese Air Force of the Second World War. Here's the Japanese bomber type, the Ki21 Mitsubishi. This was codenamed Sally by the Allies. This was a long-range bomber, heavy bomber, as you can see from the twin engines on it. This was a later version. This is the 1C. These were also, this type of aircraft were used to bomb far-flung areas like India and even northern Australia as well throughout the war. This is another bunch of Sallys. These are the KR21's 2Cs, though. These are the basically up-gunned and up-engined versions of the originals. Once again, these were used throughout the war, used to bomb faraway areas. They were long-range bombers, yeah, just nice aircraft, really. And this is how I store them. These are 9-litre, really useful boxes. These are absolutely perfect for these, and it pretty much fits everything all together, so I can carry it around quite easily, along with all the aircraft sheets as well, which I got printed and I've laminated ready for games. So that's the storage solution, if anybody was wondering, of course. And they are quite small boxes, just stacked together quite nicely. Always worthwhile getting some really useful boxes if you can. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed that little walk through this project. It's always nice to complete a project. Wargaming, people always say wargaming projects are never completed. I think I can sit down and rest on this one. I don't need to add any more aircraft at this point. I think I'm quite happy. Well, if you've enjoyed this and if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave me a comment, tell me what you think of this bit of Malayan madness. I hope you enjoyed the video, as I said, and tune in next time for another Storm of Steel video.